I didn't know
You
it
know,
was
your
scheduled.
your your book here with my Christmas present. I was giving this to everyone and saying, join us on January the 27th. We're going to be talking about it for a whole hour.
All right. Well, you know this book as well as anybody I can imagine, so I'm talking to the right person. I expect you to be doing just as much talking as I am, Jonathan
Hey, I
Wilson-Hartgrove.
brought this one too.
Oh, good.
Yes.
He wrote the introduction to that, you know.
We might have to go till midnight. Yeah, this is awesome.
Well, don't hesitate to bring that in, Jonathan, because
I
that's
will.
that's where we have a lot in common, you know.
That's right.
All right, y'all. That's our welcome to book club. This is our January book club. It's great. It's going to be so fantastic. I'm going to introduce Jonathan and Jim in just a second. We want folks to trickle in. Some of y'all are watching it on the platform. Some have the Zoom link. We like it when you do a little extra work to register and get onto the Zoom so we can interact in the chat. But all of you that are watching on platforms, you can also put questions for Jim or interesting things, or even just tell us where you're coming in from. I'm going to do a couple things as we settle in. One of them is you may have seen here in Philly. I mean, there's so much going on. We know that folks are bringing a lot of feelings and things we're carrying with us. I was on a call earlier with a bunch of our friends that have been in Minneapolis, many of whom joined the direct action and were arrested for praying there and standing in solidarity with folks. So there's a lot that's going on. But in Philadelphia, we have these historic memorials remembering not just Independence Hall and the Constitution Center, but also some of the harder truths about our history, including that many of our founding fathers were slave owners and enslaved folks and sold them and bought them. And those memorials were actually co-owned by the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania and the federal government, but agents came in from the federal government and ripped those down. And so our city has a lawsuit around that. But it's this last year, we did a historic pilgrimage through these sites, and we actually had a filmmaker with us to capture that. So we put this all in the front burner, and we'll be releasing a 9-part series. So even though those have been torn down, you can see them. I'm just going to show you a 1-minute clip of one of those right now. Lord help me as I share my screen. So this is just 1 minute of that 9-part series that we'll be releasing this week.
This is America's first White House. Of the 316 black men, women, and children that George Washington enslaved at his Mount Vernon, Virginia plantation, he took 9 of those 316 and held them right here. I was born and raised in Philly, and not one time did I hear about George Washington, America's first White House, Philadelphia, and slavery. Never heard that story. This, to me, is one of the most important sites because it disabuses the public of the notion of George Washington being this man God. You come right here and find out that he enslaved 316, that he held 9 here, that he tried to use that Gradual Abolition Act and circumvent it by saying, okay, I know I got to let them go after 6 months, so he would take them out of here and put them somewhere else. That story needs to be told. George Washington might have been a great general. George Washington might have been a great president. But can you be a great human being when you hold 316 fellow human beings in bondage? So tell the whole story.
So just keep an eye out for that. It's going to be a powerful series. It'll all be available for free. We're hoping folks will show it to their congregations and small groups and use it in curriculum in schools and things like that. So keep an eye out for that. But tonight, y'all, we have Jim Douglas, the book. As many of you know, it's okay if you didn't do your homework. We always like to say that. But the book Martyrs to the Unspeakable, Jonathan helped work on this book and is also going to kind of facilitate the conversation tonight. I'll jump in here and there, but I am really excited to listen to these two talk. They put so much into it. And we are always grateful for your work and scholarship, Jim. So even before this, Jim's just a legend. He's been doing all kinds of great work. So we'll hear all about that. Oh, I'm not, because y'all are friends joining book club, I'm just going to say that we are launching something called the National Peacemaker Association, which will kind of parody the NRA a little bit, but it's going to be a national organizing movement around peacemaking on all the intersections. So keep it on the down low for now. We're just lawyered up, getting all our trademarks and copyrights, but that's coming next month. And then morning prayer is happening every first day of the month. And am I right, John? That this is still February 1st. The one that we changed one
This
date, but
coming
this
Sunday
one's
is February 1st. Yes, it is.
yes. And so we're doing 9 a.m. February 1st with Latasha Morrison, who, if you're not familiar, y'all, with Latasha, Tasha's an amazing organizer doing tons of work around racial justice. Be the Bridge. Her work in writing is important, so important to us. So she'll be joining us on February 1st. And now, thanks for joining book club tonight. Uh, it's really beautiful to see some of y'all that are regulars, but also some new folks. So you're in for a great conversation. I'm going to pass it over to Jonathan so he can introduce our brother and dear friend, Jim Douglas.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome to Book Club, a book club that I have been looking forward to for some time. We have the great honor and privilege this evening of having with us James W. Douglas, Jim Douglas. I want to say here at the top, I believe one of the most important theologians of nonviolence we've ever had. It's a gift to be with you. You have been a guide to me my whole adult life because I was almost still a child when I met you. So it's a great honor to be able to talk to you tonight about this book, a book which you've also been writing my whole adult life. So we'll get there in a minute. But let me begin by asking you, Jim, if you would answer for those who are with us this evening the first question I remember ever asking you when we met on the way to Baghdad in 2003. And I began to get a sense of who this person was, who was way ahead of me on the journey, but who had clearly centered himself in the heart of nonviolence, in the anchor of truth that is at the center of the universe. I said to you, "How did you get into this?" And you told me a story about meeting Dorothy Day. Would you just give folks that context so they can know who we're talking to here this evening?
Well, we're talking to a disciple of Dorothy Day and also a disciple of Jonathan Wilson-Hartgrove. So don't go running out of the barn here. um, I met Dorothy for the first time when she came to Santa Clara University. This is Dorothy Day, co-founder of the Catholic Worker Movement, and I'd been doing a little writing for the Catholic Worker, and I had been in the Army um, for 6 months, a brief period of time, not in any combat zone. But then I was also at the time in the reserves. So I'm sitting opposite Dorothy Day, just the two of us over dinner. And she becomes aware from our conversation that I'm still in the United States Army and I'm writing these articles, very anti Army, supporting conscientious objection and so forth. And she said she looks at me very, very intensely, and she says, "Jim, how much longer are you going to continue to do that?" And um, I've been absorbed with that question ever since, by the way, because it applies to everything in my life. How much longer am I going to continue to do this kind of complicity or that kind of complicity? And at that particular time, I only had about 2 or 3 weeks left in my Army reserve, so I was pretty easily off the hook. But Dorothy has been asking me that question ever since.
Hmm. How long are you going to keep on doing this? Which is an invitation into another way, a way that many have walked before us, I know you've learned much from Gandhi, but you've always been following in the way of Jesus,
Yes,
and you you were you were trained as a Catholic theologian.
that's
You wrote a great book on the nonviolent cross, which I think is still one of the best Catholic theologies of nonviolence that we have. But you have told me before that it was writing this book that made you a historian. You
that's
decided to
true.
write a book about Jesus, the
I did.
historical Jesus and the nonviolence that he taught. Tell us what you learned writing this book.
What I learned basically is what I didn't know about Jesus of Nazareth. That Well, when you begin writing that kind of a book, you're really writing about yourself to a large degree. Every author who's doing anything is writing about himself or herself. So I learned from Gandhi, whom I consider to be the greatest, bar none, disciple of Jesus, and who was a Hindu. So that immediately removes us all from all the superstructure of dogma. Very fortunately, then we get to see Jesus through the eyes of a person who has nothing directly to do with Christianity.
Hmm.
That means we've gotten into, without really intending to, the universal Jesus, the
Hmm.
Jesus who goes beyond what we want to see or believe. In other words, the heart of the story. You talk about red letter Christians, the Jesus who said, love your enemies, do good to those who hate you, pray for those who persecute you, all the things we don't want to do. And Gandhi did them better than anybody, in my opinion, up to that point in history. And that includes all the greats. I include St. Francis and all the greats. They didn't quite make it to Gandhi because Gandhi practiced it without worrying about any of that other stuff.
Hmm.
And that's where we need to be, because we are in the depths of the unspeakable now. And without the assistance of Gandhi's greatest disciple, and thereby the eyes of that greatest disciple, who made it into campaigns, who made it into a campaign that overthrew the British Empire through nonviolent power, satyagraha, truth force, love force, soul force. There's liberation. That's what we need to learn.
You you are both captivated by, and I think have a captivating way of describing the power of nonviolence, and it has been um, something that has captivated your life. You've lived this and you've written about it. It seems so important to talk about right now because I think so many people are desperately aware of the need for nonviolence or non-existence, as Dr. King once said. And I mean, I was thinking about last week. I don't know if you ever watch TV, Jim, but there's a TV show that's on late with a comedian named Stephen Colbert, and he had Maria Stephan on to talk about nonviolence on on a late night show because people
Oh, I know who
people
she
are asking
is.
like, how in the world do you survive authoritarianism? How in the world do you?
Yeah,
And it turns out there are people who've done this, and you've spent your whole life studying them and following in that way, and that led you to write about people who tried to follow this way right here in these United States. And so when I met you almost 25 years ago, you
right.
said, I'm going to write a book about Martin Luther King, Malcolm X, John F. Kennedy, and Robert Kennedy. And you said, I'm going to tell it as four gospel stories.
That's right. They are.
This is the book we have now, Martyrs to the Unspeakable.
It's a dangerous book. You know why? If you drop it on your toe, you're going to break your toe. It's
I
a heavy
don't think
book.
that's the most dangerous thing about it, brother.
It's a heavy book.
But how are these gospel stories? I mean, I think people are sort of vaguely aware, at least, of these stories, of them as American stories. I don't know that people often put the four together, but people are aware that these four people were killed in the middle of the 20th century. Uh, but why are they gospel stories?
Well, let's begin with Malcolm because he's a Muslim. Now, how is this Muslim who's, portrayed as a, you know, he's portrayed in very negative fashion by all kinds of people. How is he a gospel story? Here's
Mhm.
what Malcolm X said 2 days before his death, and it's the theme of the entire book. Malcolm said to a friend who happened to be a reporter for Life magazine, so it wasn't that it didn't go on record the following week. He said to his friend, uh, "It's a time for martyrs now, and if I'm to be one, it will be in the cause of brotherhood.
Mm.
That's the only thing that can save this country."
Mm.
And I would add, and the world. Martyrdom, witness to the way. And that's the way of Jesus of Nazareth as embodied, in my view, and I think in reality, by the lives and deaths of Malcolm X, Martin Luther King, John F. Kennedy, and Robert F. Kennedy. That's the story. And it's our story. It's not something that happened some time way, way back in the 60s. It's happening right now in Minneapolis and
Yeah.
all over the United States and all over the world, where
Yeah.
9 countries possess weapons that can destroy all of humanity and all our other creatures.
Mm. You know, one of the things that's striking about the book is that it is a very American story. It tells in a highlighted way for martyr stories, but there are many stories wrapped within their stories, and
Many, many,
characters
many
people
stories.
have probably never heard of who they will get to know in reading this story. All of them living uh, in the United States, living at a time when you lived in the United States, when many people uh, saw their lives depicted on the news in various ways. But it's striking that this book begins and ends in Israel.
That's true.
And it seems to me that that has something to do with the international context of the national security state that you're concerned about. So tell folks why you decided to begin this story about America by telling a story about what was happening in Israel after the Second World War.
Well, actually, I didn't decide. My editor, Robert Ellsberg, with whom I actually wrote this book, of course, as well as with Jonathan Wilson-Hartgrove and scores of other people. It's not my book. Um, he suggested that the last shall be first and the first shall be last. It was the conclusion of the book. And he said, no, put this up front. And he was right. And it works. It works out. The whole thing is sort of like a symphony that a whole lot of people wrote. But it works like a symphony. Why does it come first? Because Kennedy was emphatically a non-proliferation president. He didn't want anybody to have nuclear weapons, beginning with the United States of America. And the first country he had to deal with on that question, because was about to obtain a nuclear weapon, was Israel. So that's why it goes first, because Kennedy was struggling hard to keep Israel from having nuclear weapons, and was struggling hard also to support the Palestinian people in returning the right of return to Israel, which comes, of course, from the United Nations, not from John Kennedy or anybody else. It's a human right. So they were there. So how do they not be in the center of the story? So that's the center of the action, because that's the first thing that Kennedy had to deal with in his presidency. On his major issue was keep the world safe from nuclear weapons, was Israel. They were the next in line to get one, and he learned that from Eisenhower.
And then in telling Kennedy's story, you go on to highlight how his challenge of the United States nuclear weapons really put him in the crosshairs of people within his own government who were determined to maintain this capacity to destroy the world in order to secure the country, or however they imagined that. But yeah, I don't think a lot of people know that part of Kennedy's story. Um, you've just said that that was a central issue for Kennedy, but he's a former soldier, certainly perceived as a cold warrior by many people. So, what kind of journey was he on that brought him to a place of recognizing that the United States had to uh, turn back from the arms escalation that could destroy the whole world?
Well, the predecessor to this book is JFK and the Unspeakable, as you know. And in there, I describe 12 very powerful reasons why he was assassinated. And in a way, he can be known by one quote especially. I'm going to read this right out of the New York Times. Because it was in a front page article in the New York Times. People say, did he ever really say this? It was on a front page article in the New York Times. I want to splinter the CIA in 1,000 pieces and scatter it to the winds. He said that right after the Bay of Pigs because he felt he'd been manipulated hopelessly into a swamp, and the CIA did it very deliberately. I want to splinter the CIA in 1,000 pieces and scatter it to the winds. He said that to one of his primary co-workers, and the New York Times printed it in its front page article. So this isn't any obscure statement, but it doesn't get cited enough. And if the Central Intelligence Agency is paying attention to that president, they don't like that. They're not going to allow him to remain president. And so when he and Khrushchev, Nikita Khrushchev, his primary enemy in the Cold War, engaged in back-channel negotiations from the very beginning of that presidency through Khrushchev's secret agent in Washington, who was going under a magazine cover, a guy named Georgy Bolshakov, who met regularly with Robert Kennedy, the Attorney General. This is Khrushchev, the major enemy of the United States, meeting through his agent with the Attorney General every 2 weeks. This is all in the book, and it's there are almost endless footnotes, and there's more in the footnotes than there is in the actual text. So don't miss the footnotes. That is treason from the standpoint of the CIA, Joint Chiefs of Staff, NSA, the whole bunch of them. It's treason from their standpoint. From our
and of course they understood that there were those national security forces that didn't want them to be in touch, which is why these were secret communications. But in the secret communication, they came to a biblical image, right?
Yes.
That they agreed on for their common circumstance. What was that? What was that story?
Noah's Ark. And incredibly, it's the so-called atheist who actually went to Bible school when he was a youngster and memorized the Gospels. That's what his son said, that Nikita Khrushchev had now memorized the Gospel. This is the atheist in the story. So in his first secret letter to John F. Kennedy, which was after their meeting in Vienna, in which they did successfully achieve a truce in Laos, the neutralization of Laos, which again was a strike against Kennedy from the standpoint of his national security advisors. But Khrushchev writes to him and he says, Mr. President, in this first secret letter, which is smuggled to John Kennedy in a newspaper a few days later, he says, let's look at it this way. We're on Noah's Ark, and we're in a sea of nuclear weapons. Let's keep the Ark afloat. This is the atheist to Khrushchev to Kennedy. He's got this biblical image to keep the Ark afloat. And when he got that smuggled to him in a newspaper, to his secretary, his press secretary in a New York hotel, he wrote back to Khrushchev from Cape Cod, looking out on the beauty of his ocean, just as Khrushchev had been looking out on the beauty of the Black Sea. He says, yes, let's keep the Ark afloat. And that's what they tried to do through their secret correspondence, which is all on record. State Department archives, and
Mm,
you can read them all. I got it all in the book. It's an amazing story,
mm,
and it's a story of why we're still alive on this earth, which I
mm,
consider grace, the grace of courage, the courage of those two men especially. And
yeah,
one of them was assassinated as a result. The other was put on in permanent house arrest for the rest of his life
yeah,
because they both tried to um, do what their national security advisors forbade them to do.
yeah.
Both of
It's
them.
fascinating. It's a fascinating story because the people who are turning towards nonviolence in this story are turning from very different places. Right?
Oh
It's one
my.
thing to be in charge of the U.S. government. It's something else to be,
Oh,
um, descended from peoples who were enslaved under the law of this government,
yes.
and yet from these very different places, Martin and Malcolm, RFK and JFK are turning in the same direction, you say. One of the striking things in the stories about both Martin and Malcolm is you go back and tell the backstory of how long the people they came from had been under surveillance. I
Huge.
didn't know a lot of that before you taught it to me. Tell people the background of both Malcolm and Martin's family surveillance under a national security state. I think a lot of people are aware these days that their phones might be being watched or something, but this goes way back.
Well, in the case of Martin, it goes back to his grandparents and World War I to right up to World War II. National security surveillance right straight through um, by a man named J. Edgar Hoover.
Hmm.
He remained the head of the FBI all the way through, but it wasn't just him. It was the entire national security state surveying these families in the case of Martin because of their power in the church. In the case of Malcolm, because um, well, they were over they were on the side of a more skeptical position toward the U.S. government still, and but their surveillance was absolute as well, and they had the chief renegade to the United States in those days. Now I'm going. Uh, you tell me who he is. You know who that?
Marcus Garvey.
Yes, Mr. Garvey,
His
Reverend
dad was a Garveyite. Yeah.
his dad, Malcolm's dad, was a strong Garveyite. He preached Garvey's
Mm,
gospel, and that was like Martin Luther King's family preaching civil rights. Well, Garvey was preaching in a way even more radical rights. So for a Garveyite and a Baptist independent Baptist preacher in the 1920s, they were heavily surveilled by the U.S. government, and the whole story I've told in both cases in the
mm,
book. And J. Edgar Hoover is principal in involvement of both, but is not Hoover alone by any means, not at all.
yeah. Yeah. And it's because you zoom in and tell these stories at such a granular level and sort of bring us along into the
Yeah,
shared awareness that the communities had of the decisions that they were making that it really comes through to me as I read it that there are just dramatic parallels with the gospel story in the sense that in each of these stories there I mean, as the quote you read from Malcolm X suggests, and as stories you tell from others make clear, that there was an awareness, right, as people were turning toward this way of nonviolence, that that there would be serious consequences if they continued in that way. That indeed they might lose their life, and in every case, these are people who decided that it was worth it. They were going to continue in that way. I yeah, I just find that to be a striking piece of it. I mean, maybe one story you could tell is how that plays out in Martin's story.
well, in Dr. King's story, the key is in 1967. 7, when he's sitting in an Atlanta airport, and he's having dinner, about to have some dinner with the man who's with him. He's kind of his his security, his personal security, and he picks up at the bookstore or something, a magazine, Ramparts magazine, and he starts turning the pages, and he sees the pictures of napalmed children, and he turns and he turns and he's turning in terms of metanoia, in the turning of those pages in that Atlanta airport. And finally, he pushes his food away that was put in front of him by his security guard. And the security guard says, well, Dr. King, Doc, it doesn't taste any good. You don't want it. And this is what he says: nothing will ever taste any good for me until I do everything I can to end that war. That's the turning of Dr. King in 67. And from that point on, he was moving in a wholly new direction. And he said very, very profoundly, and when he gave his Riverside Church address, in which he describes that turning, he says, before this, you wouldn't be describing me accurately in any profiles on courage. I wasn't any profile on courage. That's Dr. King saying that. And he's saying it truthfully, because when he marched in Selma and all the great places where he marched and where he risked his life, the Vietnam War was going on then, and he was avoiding the truth as he felt called to tell it. And he started telling that in the last year of his life, and he did not back away from it. He kept rocking more and more deeply into it until it also encompassed the poverty of all the people returning from the war, especially the blacks and poor whites and Hispanics. Everybody started walking with him, and that's what's going to be the Poor People's Campaign. They killed him in Memphis to keep him from getting to the Poor People's Campaign.
Yeah.
That's
there are a lot of people in the United States right now who are using their cell phones to take pictures, training on how to take pictures of atrocities that are happening. And it's striking. You know a lot about the person who took those pictures he was looking at. Tell us about the photographer who wanted to tell that truth and who connected Dr. King to Vietnam directly, but then himself stayed quite connected to King and his family.
Is a man named William F. Pepper, whom I came to know. And William F. Pepper was then a photojournalist, and he'd been there, taken those pictures, seen those napalmed children. And Dr. King asked to meet with him. They did. And he began to go on a journey with William Pepper. William Pepper, in turn, went on a journey with Dr. King. And when Dr. King was assassinated, William Pepper, he pulled back for a while. But then through Ralph Abernathy, Dr. King's successor and co-director of a lot of things that he did, Pepper became more and more drawn into the story, and he wrote a series of books. But most significantly, he facilitated, through the King family and the courage of Coretta Scott King, and especially her son Dexter, but the other members of her family, the siblings, all the whole King family, they had the courage to basically, through the confession of one man, Lloyd Jowers, who was involved in the King assassination, and may have actually pulled the trigger for the gun that killed Dr. King. There was a great trial in 1999 from the November 15th to December 8th, 1999 in Memphis. I attended the entire trial, was one of the very few people who did. And in that trial, the final verdict, it was a wrongful death lawsuit initiated by the King family against Lloyd Jowers because he's involved in it. and unindicted co-conspirators, and that's the United States government. That the United States government, by the verdict of 6 black and 6 white jurors who took careful notes as they were asked to do all through the trial, very, very excellent jury. They found the United States government involved specifically in the assassination of Dr. Martin Luther King. And of course, everybody heard about it the next day after the trial. No, no. And if you didn't hear about it, or if the people out here are listening to this didn't hear about it, it's for good reason. It did appear in the New York Times, who said it wasn't a real trial. It said that the judge was asleep. He was not asleep. And the person who came to the trial from the New York Times, she showed up after all the witnesses had appeared. I know, I was there. She was sitting next to me. She showed up after all the witnesses had appeared.
But there was a reporter there from Europe who she turned around and asked you, what'd she say?
She said everything, Mr. Douglas, or Jim, she's called me Jim. She said she was from Portugal, from Publico. And she was great. She came for a few days, as long as Publico would allow her to be there. But then I sent her stuff during the rest of the trial. And when we walked out of the trial one day, she said, Jim, everything in the United States is the trial of the century. Clinton's trial is the century. What's his name?
O.J. Simpson.
O.J. Simpson's trial is the trial of the century. And she said, this is the trial of the century. And who's here? You, a writer of books, and me, a writer from Portugal. And then she just shakes her head. And you know, she was called as a witness in that trial, and she gave critical testimony too. She was terrific, and she still is. She's now become the editor emeritus. She's editor for many years of the Publico in Portugal, and now she's editor emeritus. Great woman.
Yeah. The trial of the century gets almost no attention apart from Jim Douglas's book, but maybe that's part of why you name it Martyrs to the Unspeakable. You borrow this phrase from one of your teachers, Thomas Merton. Tell us what Thomas Merton meant when he talked about the unspeakable.
Well, he wrote a great.
Why can we not name these things?
He wrote a great
book. They're right in front of us.
He wrote a great book called Raids on the Unspeakable, classic work, which when I was teaching at the University of Hawaii, all my students read that book. But this is the way he describes the unspeakable in that book. He says, the unspeakable is the void that contradicts everything that is spoken, even before the words are said. It's the void that gets into the language of public and official declarations at the very moment when they are pronounced, and makes them ring dead with the hollowness of the abyss. It is the void out of which Eichmann drew the punctilious exactitude of his obedience. That's the unspeakable. And Merton is really, he's just riffing on a classic understanding of the nature of evil. It's the void. Evil is not anything. It's when we avoid responsibility. It's when we obey those things in our culture, in our national security state, number one, in our business, in our school, which we're not willing to take responsibility for, but which we instinctively know is evil. That's what Merton is describing so dramatically in this book, where he actually talks to the unspeakable in the book. That's how great a writer Merton is. And that's where he's saying, you're the void, you know. You're the void. And I'm talking to you. But we've got to come to grips with the nature of you. And here we go to Gandhi. Non-cooperation with evil is as much a duty as cooperation with good. That's what gets us. We can't just go around saying I'm doing good things here, do good things there, because our very nation is the most, as Dr. King said in his Riverside Church address, The greatest purveyor of violence in the world today is my own government. The greatest. He's not talking about the Soviet Union. He's not talking about China. He's not talking about anything. He's talking about the United States of America. He says, the greatest purveyor of violence in the world today. I would say today, the greatest purveyor of terrorism in the world today is my own government, your own government, our own government. Non-cooperation with that government is as much a duty as cooperation with all the good things we want to do.
And each of these stories you tell are of people who, in their own way,
Yes,
were able to look into that void
they did.
and speak their own truth in love.
Yeah.
What makes that possible? What makes it possible when you are looking into the hatred of, someone who will, as everyone in this country just watched, so a group of people who will jump on someone who's trying to help someone else and then shoot him in the back and cheer as they're shooting him on the ground. I mean, these are horrors that we're seeing with our own eyes right now. What makes it possible to look at that kind of evil, that kind of unspeakable reality and love? And why is love more powerful than that?
Love wins. Love wins. Well, this is what Dr. King was asked by a man who was an intern in his office during the year when Dr. King was faced with the deepest problems of the world, and that man was. Because he was just an intern to Dr. King, he was almost killed by racists outside that office a night or two before he comes barging into Dr. King's office. He says, I want to know, how can you preach love to people like that? How can you hold on to love in the face of such incredible violence? And that's the same as everybody in Minnesota could be, or Wisconsin, Milwaukee, Wisconsin could be saying today. So this is what he said. And this is while his secretary is banging on the door saying, the Department of Justice wants to talk to you, Dr. King. And this guy is saying, I want to know. And he's silent for a few minutes, sitting in his chair. And he looks up to him and he says, you've got to reach down deeper until your suffering and your love draw you closer to God. You've got to reach down deeper until your suffering and your love draw you closer to God. That's what he said. That's the same thing that Malcolm X was saying. He got it from the Quran. That's the same thing.
Suffering and your love.
That's the same thing Jesus of Nazareth was saying. He got it from the prophets and the Hebraic scriptures. And they all got it from their humanity, from the depths of their hearts. And Dr. King said, as we all know what he said at the end, but we ought to hear it again. I'm not worried about anything. I'm not fearing any man. Mine eyes have seen the glory of the coming of God. Mine eyes have seen the glory of the coming of God. That's the key. And it's the key in every chapter I write about each of these four men. At the end, it's a statement of belief. These four were all profound believers. And they're not given credit for it. It's as if has nothing to do with the rest of their lives. It had a lot to do with the rest of their lives. Bobby Kennedy, especially at the end. And when he's killed in the Ambassador Hotel, he looks like he's crucified on the cross. It's just the way he looks, lying out there on the floor. That picture taken of him, and there's a rosary that's put into his hands. Each of them got crucified by his own government. our government. And each of them regarded that government as his government, took responsibility for it by trying to turn it with millions of other people. That was a movement. That was a real movement. That's the reason why they got killed. They were of the people, for the people, by the people, and the people were ahead of them. The people being ahead of them is the reason why they turned. And when they turned, the people were pulling them forward, and we were all moving. Bang, 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 bang. That's precisely why they were killed. That's the whole story. And that's our story. And unless
It strikes me,
our story, we missed it.
it strikes me that you lived these stories as stories that you knew, stories that you were watching from afar, while you were part of a nonviolent movement that, as you're
With
saying,
you,
was
brother. With you.
well, I wasn't alive when these people were living, but you were.
Oh, but
But
all right,
but
go
I
ahead.
wanted to ask you, having taken the time to go back and do
Yeah,
so much research as a historian
yeah,
to understand these stories,
yeah,
to live inside of them, to know the people around them.
yeah.
What do you see in these stories that you couldn't see when you were, watching them on the news, on the TV? I guess I'm asking you to reflect for those of us today, who are conscious of living in a moment when there's a movement and there's a need for politicians to turn. There's a need for movement leaders to lead. All of us are caught up in this, but maybe we can't see clearly. Is there anything you can see looking back that you didn't see then that you could use to help us kind of make sense of our present?
I think very, very key to the story is not the main characters, but the witnesses who are the little known or not known at all until, yeah, I'll give one example. Glenda Graybo. And she's a big part of the King story because she knew people who were actually mechanics. They called them mechanics in the assassinations of both Dr. King and John F. Kennedy. And it spreads out, you know, the interrelationships between the mechanics of these different things go into all four stories. They're all interrelated stories. Glenda Graybo had a very horrible past. She was abused by men all her life from a child and up, and she never got past eighth grade. So when I met her, when she was attending with her husband um, preliminary hearings regarding the rifle that supposedly killed um, Dr. King, it wasn't a rifle that actually killed him. And in the course of those hearings, which William Pepper was attending and actually directing to as much as he could, I got to realize that this is somebody that's in a book of his that I read about. So I talked to this woman, Glenda Graybo, and she gave me her whole story. It's about 30 pages of one chapter on Dr. King. This is a woman who was invisible, just the way black people were invisible to white people. A woman who was regarded as I wouldn't even want to say the words because she wasn't any of those things. She was primarily a woman of courage. And she knew that the story that James Earl Ray told about there always being a Raoul who was directing him, she said, I knew Raoul. I'm going to speak up on this. She said this years after she was in the midst of all these mobsters and gangsters who were involved in as mechanics. And she had the courage to come forward. And I tell her whole story. And I can tell it now because she's no longer alive. She was terrorized in her life by having the courage to come out and put that story out. And so I hope people read her story as closely as they read every story in the book. Or Sandra Serrano, who was abused terribly by Los Angeles police people who are actually from the CIA working in the Los Angeles Police Department. That's in the story of Robert Kennedy. Or by Yuri Kochiyama, a great Asian American woman who's great in the story of Malcolm X. and who was hosting Hibakusha, and Malcolm X came to speak with the Hibakusha because the Hibakusha, that is the victims of the atomic bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, when they came to the United States, they said the person who we most want to see here, who's that? Malcolm X. We want to see Malcolm X. And Malcolm X came to meet with them. So these convergences of all these stories are just remarkable. They're full of grace and courage, and the so-called minor characters are major characters in each of them. Major
Yeah, no,
characters.
it's a beautiful part of the story. I still appreciate it's another way that your telling of it does feel like the gospel stories. You know,
It is.
there's this one character who's,
Yeah.
you know, proclaimed from the beginning and is going to be key all the way through, but along the way, lots
Yeah.
of stories get interwoven,
It's the
um,
same.
and each is invited to follow the way. It's
Well,
a powerful thing.
I'll give you a clue to how I wrote this story. Um, it was a preposterous proposal to my editor publisher Robert Ellsberg before any of it happened. I proposed that I write a commentary on the Gospel of John uh, through the stories of JFK, Malcolm, Martin, and RFK. And he said in response to me, Jim, who's going to have the money to buy this book? It'll be 10,000 pages long. And he refused that book 2 more times before I finally got it through to him, but it got broken down into a few pieces, So finally it's out, It's a miracle. It's a total miracle. I despaired about it hundreds, thousands of times.
Hmm.
It's
Well,
an act.
it's a gift that you kept coming back to it, kept listening, just as you kept coming back to this way of nonviolence yourself. We don't have time to talk tonight about all the ways that you've led us toward nonviolence, but grateful for all of that. I did want to open it up to a few of the questions that some of the
Sure,
participants
sure,
who we
sure.
can't see, but who I can see
Yeah,
their questions. One person asked, given what you know about
yeah,
this history of surveillance of movements that have
yeah.
challenged the injustice in this country. What do you think we can know today about the surveillance that's happening of nonviolent movements in the United States?
It's total. It's absolutely total. Everything that we say, according to everything we're saying in this program, this is on record. I mean, we know this from Snowden's observations and his work. There isn't anything we do that isn't being surveilled. Well, of course, that's true. Of course, though, also not only from our national security state, but from the perspective of God. This is not the world of Donald Trump. It's not the world of Vladimir Putin. It's not the world of, and name anybody else who's got a huge position of power. It's the world of God.
Hmm.
It's the word of God. If we understand that from the perspective of a Gandhi or of a Dr. King or of Malcolm X or of Dr. King or of JFK or RFK, if we understand it from the depths of their perspectives and they were willing to give their lives for it, they knew they were going to get the gun. They knew that. Bobby Kennedy, there are guns between me and the White House. He's saying that right through his campaign. He knew he was going to get it, but he knew he had to try. He knew he had to try. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven.
There's a cross for everyone, and there's a cross for me. That's what we sang in the Baptist church where I grew up.
Or as Dan
But what
Berrigan said, you better look good on wood.
if you're going to follow Jesus, you better look good on wood.
If you're going to follow Jesus, you better look good on wood. And that's
I
the
say that I
truth.
say that because I know these stories you've told, because I know the story of Jesus, and I can smile. But but a lot of people, and I think part of the power of the threat that authoritarians offer is that is that we're terrified by this surveillance state, and we're terrified by its threats of violence. What makes it possible to be free from that? How does nonviolence free us from that, Jim Douglas? Maybe I should ask it this way. Not everybody who's with us tonight knows that Leah and I, my wife and I, rode to Baghdad with you in 2003. But Leah wouldn't mind me telling everyone who's here that she has said ever since, I never would have made it if I hadn't been with Jim. Every time I looked at Jim, I knew I was going to be okay. because you already knew something about nonviolence that I think we were only then learning. What do you know that makes you able to walk the way of the cross, even though it can lead to terrible pain and death?
It's a joy to walk that way. I was having a great time with you folks. And we were there was one point where the guns were pointed right at us from that hill, and the cars in front of us were burning. But what a better way to go. I mean, if they got us, what a better way to go than to be trying our very best to do what we could to stop that terrible, terrible war. And as citizens of the United States, we have more power than anybody else in the world. I'm a dual citizen. I was born in Canada, so
As with Leah.
there you go. But I want to be here because this is where everybody in the world wants to be here now, in the sense of we've got the power to change things. And there's a movement going on right now that is very analogous to what was going on in the 60s. And you're at the heart of that. Bishop Barber is at the heart of that. We're all at the heart of that, walking at that. And it's a joy to be on that. And it's a joy to walk right into the worst of it.
Well, Dr. King said, until you've found what you're willing to die for, you don't know what you're living for.
That's
and
true.
I'm so grateful here as a middle-aged person. I'm so grateful that as a very young person, I almost died with you, Jim Douglas, because you helped me learn what life is worth living for.
And you
So what
called
a joy to be with you tonight.
You called it Rutba House, right after that place where it all happened.
Yeah.
That town.
Amen. Well, bless you, brother. Thank you for
Amen.
Martyrs to the Unspeakable. If anybody hasn't read it yet, get yourself a copy and let's walk this way together.
Amen.
I just wanted to say thanks to both of you, especially you, Jonathan. I do all these book clubs, Jim, and I'm always so into it. I don't get to sit back and listen. So I've just been sitting back, enjoying every minute of it. So grateful for both you and for all your work. Love you, brother. And so great to see you. We got all kinds of wonderful friends, some of whom we were in Baghdad with. And let's keep doing it, y'all. Let's keep doing it. Thanks for reminding us that we're not alone, Jim. Thanks, Jonathan. We'll see y'all morning prayer. Don't miss morning prayer, February 1st. Okay. Love y'all.